My name is June Holloway. I was 37 years old when my sister took a cream envelope out of my hand in the lobby of the Lyric Theater, looked me straight in the face, and said, "If you let him speak tonight, you will lose our mother twice." There were 180 people in black coats and spring dresses moving around us under the chandelier. A children's choir was warming up somewhere behind the curtain. My father was 10 feet away, smiling that soft, wounded smile people trust too quickly. My sister Mara had one hand on the envelope and the other wrapped around the strap of her bag so tightly her knuckles had gone white. I thought she was trying to ruin one more thing that belonged to me. I was wrong. By the end of that night, I would learn that my sister had spent 19 years being the wall I hated because she could not afford to be anything softer. I would learn that my father had not come back to love me. He had come back because my mother's voice was finally worth money again. And I would learn that sometimes the cruelest person in the room is not the one who says no. It is the one who waits until you are hungry enough to hear yes. If you have ever mistaken distance for indifference, stay with me. The lyrics smelled like dust, old wood, and lilies that had opened too early in the heat. My mother used to say, every theater had two smells, one for the audience and one for the people who worked before anybody clapped. The lyrics still had both. Butter in the lobby, rope and paint backstage. I stood between them with my dead mother's name embossed in silver on the program and my living father asking for one signature. The envelope in my hand held the performance release for my mother's final song cycle, Winter Rooms. My father said the theater needed it before the memorial concert could move forward cleanly. He said, very gently, that he did not want me blindsided in front of the board. He said Mara was making things difficult because Mara had always made things difficult where he was concerned. Then Mara took the envelope from me. "You do not sign anything he brings you," she said. Her voice was low, flat, controlled. That made it worse. "Stop doing this," I said. "June." "No, not tonight. You don't get to lock every door and call it love." That hit her. I saw it land. A small movement under the eyes. Her mouth set harder, not softer. My father took one careful step toward us. "Girls, please." Mara turned without looking at him. "Do not call us that." To everyone nearby, she was the difficult older sister again, the rigid one. The one who had spent half my life deciding what I should know, when I should know it, and whether I should know it at all. My father looked tired and patient. Mara looked cold. That had been the arrangement for months. The memorial concert was in honor of my mother, Eleanor Holloway, who had taught piano and voice lessons in our Ohio River town for 26 years and written the kind of songs people call simple only because they have never tried to write anything that lasts. Her students had gone on to do ordinary things and extraordinary ones: dental hygienists, choir directors, a state senator who still could not carry a tune but remembered every breathing exercise, a Broadway understudy who sent flowers every year on my mother's birthday. The town had spent 2 years restoring the old Lyric, and the reopening was built around my mother's unfinished work. That was why my father came back. Not when my mother died. Not when I graduated high school. Not when I finished college with loans and 2 jobs and an ulcer I did not tell anybody about. He came back when the local paper ran a photo of the restored stage and mentioned that Eleanor Holloway's final, unpublished songs would be premiered in April. My father called me 4 days after that article ran. I had not heard his voice in 19 years. At first, I did not recognize it. I was in my studio in Cincinnati, standing over a 19th century ceramic wash basin with a crack running through the glaze like frost. I restore damaged things for museums and private collections. It is quiet work. Good work for a woman who had spent most of her life learning how to touch breakage without making it worse. June? Nobody says my name quite like family. Friends say it lightly. Colleagues say it quickly. Family says it as though they still remember which version of you came before this one. I sat down on the stool beside my work table. It's Dad. There are words that do not belong in your adult life until they do. Dad was one of them. He sounded older, softer, like a man who had spent a long time regretting something in private and had now chosen to sound humble in public. He said he had been trying to find the right time. He said there was no right time for 19 years of silence. He said he was sorry before he said anything else. He knew exactly what order to do it in. I asked him how he got my number. He laughed once, quietly. "Your work website. I followed your career from a distance." That should have told me something. I let it tell me almost nothing. He said he had seen the article about the lyric. He said he had been in touch with the theater board. He said he wanted my mother honored properly and feared Mara would turn the night into an act of punishment. He said Mara still blamed him for everything that happened after my mother got sick. He said there were things I had never been told because Mara had decided, very early, that pain belonged to her if she got there first. Then he said the sentence that opened the door. "I think your mother wanted those songs to come back to you, June, not to Mara, to you." My mother had been dead 19 years. There are women who stop needing their mother at 20. I was not one of them. I had learned to function without mine. That is not the same thing. I asked him what he meant. He said he had something to show me. I drove to Ashby 2 weekends later. Ashby is the kind of town that still puts chairs out on porches before dinner. The sidewalks crack in squares, not lines. There is a pharmacy with a hand-painted window, a diner that serves lemon pie on Thursdays, and a church bell that runs 2 minutes late every Sunday because nobody has ever bothered to fix the clock right. The Holloway women had lived there for 3 generations before I left. Mara still lived over the flower shop. My mother had owned Holloway Florals and taught music in the upstairs room that faced the river. After she died, Mara took over the shop at 27, though she had been planning to move to Chicago for culinary school. She never went. She learned to wire corsages, calculate funeral orders, and stand on her feet 10 hours a day, while raising a grieving teenager who made everything harder by refusing to call grief what it was. That teenager was me. Mara is 9 years older than I am. When she was 17, she was the kind of girl teachers handed extra responsibility to without asking whether she was already carrying too much. She has our mother's hands, broad palms and square fingertips, built for piano octaves and florist shears. She does not waste words. She dislikes sloppy sentiment and badly wrapped gifts. She has never once in my life said calm down, unless the room was actually on fire. This makes her seem severe to people who like their love narrated aloud. When I was younger, I thought her silence meant she loved duty more than people. What it meant was that she had been doing 2 jobs at once for so long, she no longer believed one sentence could carry what she meant. When I got to Ashby, my father was waiting in the diner on Front Street with a pot of coffee already on the table. He stood when he saw me. I hated that this moved me. I hated even more that he seemed to know it would. He had gone silver at the temples. His shoulders had narrowed. Time had made him look less handsome and more believable. He wore a navy sweater and a wedding band no longer on his hand. He looked like a man who had learned tenderness too late and wanted credit for arriving with it. "June," he said again. I let him hug me, briefly, carefully, like holding a photograph you are not sure belongs to you. He told me he lived in Lexington now. He did consulting work for arts organizations. He said he had made a mess of his life after leaving Ashby and had no excuse worth offering. He did not blame my mother. He did not blame Mara. He blamed himself in exactly the right amount, enough to seem honest and not enough to sound dangerous. Then he slid a small object across the table. My mother's metronome. Black wood. Brass pendulum. Tiny chip on the left side, where I had knocked it off the piano bench at 13 and cried for an hour because I thought I had ruined something holy. "How did you get this?" I asked. "It was in one of the boxes from storage. Your mother's things. Mara had more than she told you." The diner around us went quiet, in the way diners do when nobody stops talking, but a private thing settles over one table. I touched the chip with my thumb. "She told me she donated most of the music equipment after Mom died. She told you what suited her." That was the beginning. Over pie and coffee, he gave me a version of my family that fit every old ache I had. Mara had pushed him out after my mother died because she needed someone to hate. Mara had controlled the house, the shop, the upstairs music room, and the archive of my mother's work. Mara had ignored his calls and returned his checks. Mara had decided I was too fragile for the truth, then grown used to being the person who rationed it. He said it with sorrow, not rage, that mattered. Rage makes you defend the person being attacked. Sorrow makes you feel clever for noticing what others missed. He said the lyric board had reached out because they needed family authorization to stage Winter Rooms publicly. He said my mother's notebooks and rehearsal tapes were in the upstairs music room over the flower shop, which Mara kept locked. He said he only wanted the songs handled with integrity, but Mara had made that impossible. "Why would she lock me out of Mom's room?" I asked. His gaze dropped in a way I now understand was practiced. "Because if she lets you in, she stops being the keeper of the story." The terrible thing was that I had evidence for this. Mara had kept that room locked since the funeral, not just closed, locked. She changed the code every year. I knew, because every now and then I would try the old one and hear the small, flat rejection beep from the keypad. When I was 21 and reckless with resentment, I pounded on that door until my hand swelled. Mara opened it just enough to step into the hallway and told me, "Not like this." I heard control. I did not hear fear. When I got to the flower shop that afternoon, Mara was in the back cooler in a gray sweatshirt and jeans, stripping leaves from cream roses with the radio on low. She came out with cold on her cheeks and flower wire hanging from one finger. She looked at me, then at the metronome in my hand. "Where did you get that?" The right answer would have been simple. I chose not to be simple. Dad gave it to me. She went still in the way a person goes, still when the thing they feared finally becomes visible. "He called you?" "Yes." "You met him alone?" "Yes." She closed the cooler door with more care than necessary. "How long has he been back in town?" "I don't know." That made her laugh once, but there was no humor in it. "Of course you don't." I put the metronome on the counter between us like proof of something. "Why is Mom's room still locked, Mara?" "Because it is." "That's not an answer." "It's the one I have." I felt 14 again, and that was the problem. Family has a way of collapsing your age on contact. Suddenly, you are not a competent adult woman with her own lease and tax accountant and good wool coat. You are the child who was told later, not now, because I said so. "He said you kept things from me." He said that, yes, and you believed him fast. That landed because it was true. I believed what matched my life, I said. "You locked the room. You never talked about him. You decided what I could know. What was I supposed to think?" For 1 second, just one, her face changed. Not to softness. To fatigue so old it looked structural. "I was hoping," she said, "you might think I had a reason." Then the look was gone. That night I stayed in a hotel instead of over the shop because I could not bear the old bedroom, the sloped ceiling, the quilt my grandmother made, the way the air still smelled faintly of starch and florist foam. Mara texted at 10:14. "There's soup in the fridge if you come by tomorrow. And take your umbrella. Heavy rain around noon. No mention of our father. No apology. No explanation." That, too, was how she loved. Sideways, like slipping a coat over the back of a chair, because you would never call attention to a shiver if you could solve it first. I did not go for the soup. Over the next 6 weeks, the pattern settled in. My father called often, but never so often it looked like pressure. He sent me scanned pages from one of my mother's old notation notebooks. He remembered details that made my throat tighten. The yellow mug she used in the shop office. The way she tapped a pencil against her lip when she was moving a melody around. The sugar biscuits from Kellerman's Bakery she bought every first Saturday, then pretended she had no idea who ate the last one. He listened when I talked about work. He asked about glaze chemistry and museum humidity like he genuinely cared. Once he said, "Your mother would have been proud of how careful you are with broken things." That sentence held me for days. Mara did the opposite of holding. She resisted everything. She would not give the lyric board the code to the upstairs room. She would not let the theater director, Evelyn Pike, inventory the tapes without her present. She would not allow my father inside the flower shop after hours. When I asked why, she said, "Because I said no." When I asked whether my mother wanted the songs performed, she said, "That is not the right question." When I asked what the right question was, she said, "Why he came back now." I hated that answer because it required patience, and patience was what people had been asking from me ever since my mother died. Be patient with your father. Be patient with Mara. Be patient with the town. Be patient with grief. Patient is what people call a girl when they need her to wait quietly while they sort out which truth she can bear. I had been patient enough. My hope person, though I did not know that was what she was at the time, was Lena Ortiz. Lena and I had sung in my mother's Saturday youth choir together from age 9 to 14. She now managed events at the Lyric and had a laugh that always arrived half a second before it should. We met for coffee one Tuesday morning in the theater lobby, while volunteers were steaming old velvet seat covers in the main hall. "You look tired," she said. "Family memorial concert," I said. "What gave it away?" She slid a paper cup toward me. "Too much cinnamon, exactly how I liked it." She remembered. I had forgotten I ever told her. Then, without warning, she said, "Mara's been sleeping about 4 hours a night." I looked up. "Why would you know that?" "Because she's here at 6 every morning checking the humidity in the archive room herself. Because she brings me thermoses and asks whether anyone has called asking for copies of Eleanor's tapes. Because she nearly bit off one board member's hand when he suggested your father speak before intermission." That doesn't help her case. Lena watched me over the lid of her cup. "Maybe not. But it does tell you she's scared, not casual." I said nothing. Lena added, more quietly, "She's not good at being loved back, June. That doesn't mean she's not doing it." I changed the subject. That was my gift when I got too close to something true. I could redirect a conversation so neatly people thought they had chosen the turn themselves. A week later, my father asked me to meet him at the Lyric after rehearsal. He was standing backstage with a leather folder and the kind of careful hope that makes you want to reward it. He had spoken to the board, he said. The memorial concert program still needed a signed family release so the theater could record and distribute the performance legally if they wanted to use clips for fundraising. Mara was dragging her feet. He did not want the night endangered by stubbornness. As Eleanor's husband, he said, he could sign on one side, but he wanted me included. He said it mattered that I was seen. Then he placed the paper in front of me. It was not a simple release. I read slowly. The way you do when your profession has trained your eyes to look for the paragraph people hope you will skip. The form named him as a co-administrator of Eleanor Holloway's unpublished musical materials and gave broad discretion over future licensing connected to public performance. "I thought this was just for the concert," I said. His expression shifted only slightly. "That's the standard language they use. For future representation? In case opportunities arise." "What opportunities?" He smiled, tired and fatherly and so reasonable I nearly hated myself for resisting it. "June, these songs may travel farther than Ashby. It would be a shame if poor paperwork buried them." Poor paperwork. Such an elegant name for surrender. I took the form home and called Mara that night. "I need you to tell me the truth," I said the moment she answered. "About which part?" "About why Dad cannot go near Mom's work." Long silence. Not empty. Deciding. Then she said, "Come to the shop tomorrow at 7, upstairs, alone." It was the first time in 19 years she had invited me to that room. I got there 10 minutes early. The flower shop was dark except for the workbench lamp in the front window and the small yellow square of light at the top of the stairs. I climbed slowly, one hand on the rail polished by 3 generations of women carrying buckets and music stands. The upstairs hallway looked smaller than memory and exactly like it. Faded wallpaper with tiny green vines. The old radiator that clicked before it came fully on. My mother's framed recital posters, still slightly crooked. Mara was standing at the keypad. She did not enter the code until I was beside her. Her shoulders were pulled tight under a navy cardigan. She smelled like rain, carnations, and the lavender soap she had used since I was 12. Before she opened the door, she said, "Before we continue, I want to say this. Hidden Revenge Stories channel shares stories about pain, truth, and the moments people finally understand what love or betrayal really meant. If this story speaks to you, leave your thoughts below and tell me where you are listening to this story from." Then she gave me the look older sisters have when they are trying not to smile in the middle of something serious. It startled me so badly I laughed, a real laugh, small but real. The sound went into the hallway and made the whole house feel briefly less haunted. Then she opened the door. The room smelled like dust, paper, and the ghost of my mother's perfume, something citrus and dry that lived longest in wool collars and piano benches. The upright piano was still against the far wall, covered. The lesson chairs were stacked in the corner. Shelves ran along one side, each box labeled in Mara's square handwriting. Recital programs, tuition ledgers, choir arrangements, winter rooms, rehearsals. A reel-to-reel machine sat on the table beside 3 archival storage cases and a tin of sharpened pencils. Nothing had been erased. That hit me first. I had spent half my life angry at a theft that had never happened. Mara crossed the room and put one palm on a gray storage box. "Your father has been asking for this room since February," she said. "Not you, him." The theater article ran on February 3rd. He emailed Evelyn Pike on February 5th. He emailed me on February 6th. He emailed again on the 9th, the 15th, and the 21st. He called the shop. He called from different numbers. He tried the back stairs one night when Lena was still here. My mouth went dry. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because the second I said his name, you would have heard every sentence after that through the part of you that still wanted a father." She said it without contempt. That made it unbearable. There are ways to tell the truth that only feed the wrong hunger. I looked at the boxes, at the neat order of them, at the years of care I had not imagined. Because rage is lazy that way. Rage prefers a simpler room than the real one. "Then tell me now." Mara drew in a breath. Not dramatic. Measured, as if she had practiced saying this without turning it into a weapon. "He sold one of Mom's demo tapes when you were 11. I stared at her. "He what?" "Not one of the published songs, an unreleased one. He had a friend in Columbus who knew a regional ad producer. Your father took a copy of one of her rehearsal tapes and sold temporary use of the melody without her permission. Mom found out because someone from church recognized it in a furniture store commercial and thought it was funny." The room seemed to tilt around a fixed center I could not find. "He told me he supported her work. He supported it when he could stand next to it." My hands had started to shake. I put them flat on the table. "Why didn't Mom tell me?" "Because you were 11. Why didn't you tell me when I was 20? Or 30? Mara's gaze met mine directly. "Because people like him do not stop being dangerous when the girls they use turn into women. They just change which need they talk to." That sentence stayed with me. Then she opened the gray box. Inside were folders, logs, copies of certified mail receipts, theater board correspondence, a stack of old access requests and licensing inquiries. And underneath, in a separate cloth sleeve, a slim cassette tape labeled in my mother's handwriting. "For Mara if Daniel returns, and for June when she is ready." I sat down because my knees had gone unreliable. "You had this?" I said, "Yes." "For how long?" "Since the week before she died." I could barely hear my own voice. "And you decided I wasn't ready for 19 years?" "No," Mara said. "I decided you weren't ready while you still wanted him to choose you. There are accusations and there are diagnoses. That was the second kind. I wanted to argue. Instead I asked, why now?" Because he put a paper in front of you. My head snapped up. You knew? Lena saw him meet you backstage with a folder, she told me. Did he ask you to sign him into administrative control? I nodded. Mara closed her eyes once. Only once. When she opened them again, the anger was gone. What remained was older than anger. That's what he does. She pulled out another folder and placed it in front of me. Inside were copies of older paperwork. Not mine, my mother's. Draft authorization forms with Daniel Holloway, listed as representative for future performance rights. Unsent. Crossed through in my mother's own hand. A letter from a church administrator documenting that Eleanor Holloway had removed Daniel's access to her materials after unauthorized duplication of rehearsal recordings. Receipts for private storage, handwritten notes in the margin of a yellow legal pad. If he comes back smiling, stall. If he asks for June, do not let him ask her hungry. He knows how to sound sorry before he means anything by it. My mother's writing. I put my hand over my mouth. Mara did not touch me. That is one of the things she does best. She knows the difference between comfort and intrusion. Instead, she said, "There's more." We listened to the tape. My mother's voice came thin through the small speaker, weaker than I remembered, but unmistakable. Not a grand farewell. No swelling speech, no saintly wisdom. My mother had always distrusted people who got poetic only when somebody was dying. "Mara," she said first, briskly, as if dictating a grocery list, "if you are hearing this, then I did not get to keep sorting the room myself, which means you'll do too much and say too little, so try not to be impossible." I laughed and cried at the same time, which is an ugly sound and a true one. Then my mother kept going. She said Daniel loved admiration more than intimacy and talent more than duty. She said he knew how to love an audience and mistake that for loving the people who made it possible. She said he had a particular weakness for arriving late with flowers and apologies after someone else had paid the practical cost of surviving him. She said if he came back because of the songs, the room stayed locked until June could enter it wanting truth more than reunion. Then the tape changed. Her voice softened. "June, if Mara plays this for you, it means you are older than I wanted and still mine in ways time does not fix. Listen to me carefully. Your sister will look cruel if she does this right. Let her. She has always been willing to be misunderstood by the people she feeds. She learned that from me, and I am sorry for giving her so much of my strength and so little of my softness. She is not keeping you from love. She is keeping a hungry man from teaching you that crumbs are a feast." I broke then, not loudly. My body simply gave up the fiction that it was holding. Mara handed me a clean dish towel from the shelf instead of tissues. That was her, practical to the point of tenderness. I pressed it to my face and cried into cotton printed with tiny blue cornflowers because it had probably once wrapped somebody's wedding bouquet wire. When I could breathe again, I asked the question that mattered. "Why didn't you tell me he tried to contact me before this year?" Mara looked at the far wall. "Because sometimes he did." I waited. "He contacted your high school during your senior year and said he wanted your address. The principal called me because I was your emergency contact by then. He contacted your college registrar once, then your first gallery after that article about your restoration fellowship. He never got your location from me." I felt cold all the way through. "How many times?" "7 that I know about." "7. Yes. Did he ask about me?" "No," Mara said. "He asked where to send paperwork." That was the moment the floor dropped out from under the story I had built. Not because my father was worse than I knew, though he was, because my sister had been standing in front of that knowledge alone. 4 years, and I had called her controlling. When I looked at her, really looked, I saw not hardness but mileage. The kind you earn from making the same ugly decision over and over because the alternative keeps somebody else prettier than safe. "Why didn't you ever defend yourself?" I asked. "Against what?" she said, not sharply, tiredly. "You were 17, then 19, then 24, and working 2 jobs, then 30, And finally sleeping through the night on your birthday. What was I supposed to say? Your father doesn't miss you, he misses signatures? That would not have healed you. It would only have humiliated you. I thought of every birthday Mara had shown up before dawn with cinnamon toast and coffee, exactly one shade lighter than I make it myself now. Every year, no matter where we were with each other, I had once asked why she always came so early. She had said, "Because that's when you wake up on this date." I thought it was because my mother died 2 days before my 18th birthday, and the week had fused in my body. I understood now there had been another reason. Mara knew which dates made our father reach. That was one of the old proofs. Not dramatic, repeated, quiet. Love tends to keep its own logs. The memorial concert was 3 days away. We sat on the floor of the music room until after midnight, sorting the rest of the archive together. Every hour or so, Mara got up and checked the door without seeming to. Old habit. Old guard dog instinct. I found rehearsal notes in my mother's hand. Coffee rings on paper. Tuning forks wrapped in handkerchiefs. Students, thank you cards, choir rosters, and a notebook page with a grocery list on one side and the bridge of a song on the other. I also found, tucked inside a binder, copies of the annual storage payments and theater insurance renewals Mara had made in her own name for 19 years. She had kept the room not because it made her powerful, because it cost money every year to do it right, because leaving it vulnerable would have been easier, because she had chosen harder. At 1 a.m, I asked the question I had been afraid to ask since dinner in the lobby months earlier, since all the years before that, really. Did she love me less because I was younger? Because I didn't help enough? Mara's answer came so fast I knew she had been waiting half a life to give it. No. She turned another page in the inventory ledger and kept speaking. She loved you in the direction of your future, which is a bad kind of love for the child still standing in the room. She thought you had time. She thought I would understand lack because I was older. She was wrong about some things. Very wrong. But not that. She never loved you less. I sat there with my mother's handwriting in my lap and finally let myself be loved by the dead in the only way they can manage, which is through what they prepared before leaving. The next morning, I met my father in the Lyric lobby and gave the release form back unsigned. He took it with a smile that lasted almost long enough. "I think we should let the board handle the performance and leave future rights alone for now," I said. His face did not change much. That was impressive in its own way. "Did Mara get to you?" I heard it then. Not concern. Ownership. The irritation of a man finding another hand already on the wheel. "I listened to Mom's tape," I said. "That did it." The smile vanished, not all at once, but in sections. "What tape?" "The one she left about you." He stared at me, and for the first time in all our new, careful meetings, I saw something honest. Not shame. Calculation interrupted. "She had a flair for melodrama when she was hurt," he said. "My mother had many flaws. Melodrama was not one of them. She balanced church music ledgers in 3 colors and labeled freezer soup by date." "No," I said. "That was your department." His mouth hardened. "June, your sister has lived for 20 years on turning me into a villain." I surprised us both by answering calmly. "She didn't have to turn you into anything. You arrived assembled." He stepped closer, lowered his voice, and did the thing I think he had done to women his whole life when public charm began to fail him. He made intimacy sound like truth. "You are making a mistake because you want your sister to deserve what she took from you." "What did she take?" "Time, access, a father." I shook my head. "No, she took the job you dropped." He looked at me then as if seeing not a daughter but an obstacle. There was no scene, no raised voice. Men like him prefer damage that can still pass for disappointment. "You sound just like her," he said. That was meant to insult me. It landed somewhere entirely different. The memorial concert that night did not become about destroying my father. That is important. I know the easy version of this story would end with him humiliated, escorted out, publicly named, and neatly punished, while I stood under the stage lights feeling taller than my childhood. That is not what happened. Something better did. The room filled slowly, the way meaningful rooms do. Choir alumni, former students, board members, neighbors who remembered my mother carrying flats of pansies into the church basement every spring, parents with children in shiny shoes, old men who had once flirted with my grandmother and still bought roses from the shop every May. My father was in the program as special guest and family representative. That line had gone to print before Mara and Evelyn could stop it. Evelyn, who became the authority figure my family needed, because institutions sometimes have to say out loud what a daughter cannot bear to hear from blood, met me by the wings before the program started. "You're certain?" she asked. "Yes," she nodded once. Professional, grave. "Then we do it cleanly." That was the promise I needed. Cleanly, no spectacle. No theater about the theater. The children's choir sang first. Their white collars trembled a little under the lights. Then 2 former students performed the opening songs from Winter Rooms, with arrangements my mother had never heard finished. I stood beside Mara in the dark wing with the program folded in my hand and listened to our mother return in phrases. Not as a ghost, as work. As preparation reaching past death into the mouths of living people. After the 3rd song, Evelyn walked to the microphone. She thanked the donors, the board, the volunteers, the town. Then she said there would be a short pause before the final dedication because the family had requested one archival addition to the evening. My father shifted in the front row. Evelyn continued, "When we restore a building, we do not only polish what is visible, we also check what was wired behind the walls, who paid to keep it dry, and which keys were used to open which doors. The same should be true when we restore a life in public." Then she invited me to the stage. I did not wear revenge. I wore a dark green dress with sleeves and my mother's small gold studs. My hands were steady because by then I was not trying to win a father. I was trying to keep my mother from being used one more time. I stood at the microphone and looked, first, not at him, but at Mara. She was beside the piano in the wing, half in shadow, one hand braced against the plaster wall, as if holding the building up by herself, which in some ways she had been. Then I looked at the audience. "My name is June Holloway," I said, "and before the final songs continue, I need to correct the shape of this evening." The room quieted completely. For the last several months, there has been pressure to place my mother's unpublished work under the control of someone who did not protect it while she was alive and did not preserve it after she died. That will not happen. My father stood then, not fully, just enough to signal objection. Evelyn did not look at him. She looked at the house manager, who took one step closer to his aisle. Again, cleanly. I went on. For 19 years, the upstairs music room over Holloway Florals was maintained, insured, cataloged, and protected by my sister, Mara Holloway, in accordance with written instructions left by our mother and supported by church and theater records. Those records are with the board. They are dated, they are boring, they are accurate, and they show a pattern of care that did not ask for applause. I heard a woman in the 3rd row start crying before I had. "That room stayed locked not to keep love out," I said. "It stayed locked to keep exploitation from walking back in wearing regret." Then Evelyn signaled the booth. My mother's voice came through the theater speakers, thinner than music and stronger than sentiment. "If Daniel comes back because of the songs or because of June, stall him. He knows how to sound sorry before he means anything by it." A sound moved through the audience, not gossip, not scandal. Recognition, the kind that arrives when people realize they have misread the weather of a family for years. The tape continued. "She will think Mara is cruel. Let her. Better she lose patience with her sister than lose herself to a man who mistakes return for repair." I did not look at my father then. I looked at Mara. She had gone completely still, not triumphant, not vindicated, just stripped. There is a particular vulnerability in being publicly understood after a lifetime of being privately misread. It can look almost like fear. I spoke one more time. My mother's work will remain under the care of the Eleanor Holloway Archive at the Lyric, with oversight from the board and with my sister and me acting together, which is how it should have been said from the beginning. The last dedication tonight belongs to the woman who protected those songs, and the girl attached to them long after protection made her look unkind. Then I turned toward the wing. "Mara?" I said, and my voice almost broke on her name. "Come stand with me." She did not move right away. Then Lena, from somewhere in the dark, put a hand lightly at Mara's back, and my sister walked into the light. There was applause then, but not the roaring kind. Not the kind men imagine for themselves when they think exposure is the point. It was warm, rising, full of old choir parents and flower customers, and women who had watched Mara carry too much and were relieved, finally, to see the weight named. My father sat down. That was the end of his importance in the room, not because he was shamed hard enough, because the room's attention moved elsewhere, toward the years of unseen labor, toward the protection, toward the sister nobody had thanked correctly. That is what justice looked like to me then, not his collapse. Her recognition. We finished the concert with the final 2 songs from Winter Rooms. Mara stood beside me for both. She does not sing in public. She never has. But when the children's choir repeated the final refrain, she mouthed the words under her breath, because she had known them longer than anyone else alive. Afterward, there was no hallway fight, no cinematic confrontation. My father tried once, near the donor wall, to say my name. I turned and said, quietly, "You may contact the archive through the board's attorney if you believe you have a claim. You do not contact me directly again." He looked at Mara. She said nothing. That was the point. He had spent years making women do the emotional labor of naming his failures. Neither of us would perform that service for him again. He left through the side doors under the old exit sign that had flickered since my 9th grade chorus recital. The real climax of the night happened 20 minutes later in the upstairs music room with no audience except me, Mara, Lena, and Evelyn. The 4 of us sat on the floor among archive boxes while volunteers folded programs downstairs. The building had gone soft with post-event fatigue. You could hear distant laughter, cutlery from the reception, the low wheeled rattle of coat racks moving across tile. Mara took off her shoes and rubbed the back of her neck. "I'm sorry," I said, "not for everything. Specificity matters in family. Vague apologies are a way of keeping most of the damage alive. I'm sorry I made your protection answer for his choices. I'm sorry I called your fear control because that was easier for me than admitting I still wanted him. And I'm sorry you had to do all of this alone." Mara looked down at her hands. "You were not supposed to know alone feels like that when you're young." I laughed through tears. "I'm not that young. You are to me." There it was, plain, the whole shape of her. I started crying again, and this time Mara did touch me. Not a hug. She sat beside me and leaned our shoulders together the way she used to when I had fevers and did not want to be mothered out loud. "That's enough," she said softly. "You don't have to break yourself to prove you understand." I put my head on her shoulder and felt, with painful clarity, how long it had been since I allowed myself that comfort. Years, maybe decades. My sister's cardigan was rough against my cheek. She still used the same lavender soap. Underneath it, there was the faint mineral scent of flower buckets and old paper. I said the thing that mattered most. "Thank you for being hated," instead of careless. She made a sound I had never heard from her before, not quite a sob. The body trying not to admit relief. Recovery did not happen in one conversation. That is another lie stories like to tell. My father sent 2 emails and 1 certified packet through the board in the next month. Evelyn handled them. The archive policies did not change. The performance release was rewritten cleanly, narrowly, and signed by Mara and me together. No one gave him future control of anything. I heard through town channels that he had tried to interest a small agency in, quote, representing the Eleanor Holloway catalog before the concert, and lost their interest when the board documentation became clear. That was enough. I did not need more. What I needed was slower. I took 3 weeks off work that summer and moved into the room over the flower shop. Not my old bedroom, but the little back room where my mother used to keep ribbon stock and recital dresses. Mara pretended this was purely practical because the archive needed sorting. I let her pretend. In the mornings, we drank coffee in the shop office before opening. The office was so narrow that if both of us stood at once, one had to step backward into the filing cabinet. The fan in the window clicked on rotation. Mara always forgot and bought the expensive peaches from the farm stand on Wednesdays because our mother liked them bruised and fragrant, and some habits outlived the people who taught them. We worked through boxes together. We found every version of my mother again, not just saintly mother, dead mother, impossible to compete with mother. We found irritated mother, who wrote, "Don't let tenor soloists touch my pencil" in the margin of a score. We found exhausted mother, who kept receipt books tucked into hymnals and circled overdue tuition names twice before crossing them out entirely. We found loving mother in the details. A packet of hair ties labeled for June because she hated when my hair stuck to my neck during summer choir. A note reminding herself to ask Mara about Chicago culinary schools. A recipe card with my favorite tomato soup on one side and the line change for a winter ballad on the other. We found the proof that love inside a family is almost never divided as neatly as the children fear. It is misapplied, delayed, distorted by fatigue. But sometimes, if you are lucky, the record is better than the feeling you inherited. One afternoon, while we were cataloging recital photographs, I asked Mara why she never left. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a box of slides and a pencil tucked into her bun. "I did leave," she said. I looked up. "When?" "In my head," she said. "For about 4 months when I was 27. I looked at apartments in Chicago. I had brochures. Then Mom got worse and you stopped eating anything that needed chewing. So I stayed another year, then another. Then it was my life." She said it without martyrdom, which made it harder to romanticize and easier to respect. "Do you regret it?" I asked. Mara considered. "I regret that nobody asked what it cost. I don't regret you. You can live a whole life without hearing the sentence you most need. Then it arrives in a hot upstairs room while you are both covered in archive dust and wearing old t-shirts, and somehow that is the right place for it." By August, we had opened the music room to the public 2 afternoons a week as the Eleanor Holloway study room. Children used the upright piano again. Retired choir ladies came in with casseroles and corrections. Lena ran volunteer orientation with terrifying cheer. Evelyn helped us apply for a tiny state preservation grant. I took over the object catalog and digitization because broken and fragile things are still my best language. Mara handled access. Of course she did. Only now I understood that guarding and sharing are not opposites when done by the right hands. My recovery with my sister happened in scenes, not speeches. The first Sunday I stayed for dinner again, Mara put the good butter in a dish instead of leaving it wrapped in paper. That was her version of ceremony. The first time I had a panic spell in the shop office after hearing a customer mention my father's name in casual town gossip. Mara did not tell me to breathe. She slid my mug into my hands and said, "Count 5 blue things." That had been our system since I was 15. I had forgotten she invented it. The first birthday after the concert, I woke at 6:10 to a soft knock on the back stairs. Mara was standing there with cinnamon toast and coffee, exactly 1 shade lighter than mine. I laughed and took the tray. "You can stop doing this now," I said. She looked offended. "No," I moved aside. "All right." That morning we ate on the fire escape outside the archive room with our feet on the iron steps warming in the sun. The river smelled green and metallic below us. Somebody on Main Street was already testing a leaf blower. Normal life, which is a lovely thing after years of family mythology. I asked her then, why 6:10? She looked out over the rooftops before answering. That was the time he called the first birthday after Mom died, she said. You waited by the phone from 6:10 to 7 and pretended you weren't. So after that, I came first. There are discoveries that do not explode. They settle. That one settled into me for days. I had thought the toast was habit. It was a shield with cinnamon on it. My relationship to my mother changed too. That surprised me most. I had spent years believing the only honest choices were idealize her or resent her. Sorting the archive gave me a third option. I got to know her as a woman who loved deeply and arranged badly, who saw danger clearly in some places and missed damage in others, who trusted Mara's endurance too much because it looked so much like competence, who loved me toward the future and failed to imagine how abandoned that can feel in the present. That understanding did not make me love her less. It made the love inhabitable. And Ashby, which had been the town of my grievance for so long, became something else. Not innocent, not rewritten, just larger than the narrow hurt I had stored there. In October, the Lyric hosted a student recital using 2 restored songs from Winter Rooms. A little girl with one missing front tooth sang the opening verse, terribly and bravely, while her father filmed from row 6. Mara sat at the back with her florist ledger open on her lap, pretending to work and crying into the spine of the notebook. I sat beside Evelyn and labeled program copies for the archive. Afterward, when the lobby cleared, Mara and I stood under the chandelier where she had taken the envelope from my hand months earlier. You were right, I said. She gave me a look. About what, specifically? It would be nice to mark the date. I smiled. If I had let him speak that night, I would have lost her twice. Mara's face changed then. Not big, just enough. I was afraid you'd never forgive me for that sentence, she said. I know. Do you? I thought about the locked room. The tape, the toast. The 7 times she stood between my life and a man asking for paperwork with my name on it. I thought about how many kinds of love look ugly before context arrives. Yes, I said. I do. Then, because she would never ask for it, I hugged her first. She held on hard, not polished, not graceful. Family almost never is. At closing time, we went upstairs and shut the archive windows against the cold. The piano cover was folded back because one of the choir kids had been practicing scales before her ride came. A yellow lamp lit the shelves. The room no longer looked preserved for mourning. It looked used. That, finally, was the right tribute. Mara turned the key in the cabinet that held the original tapes, then handed it to me. I stared at it. She said boundaries are more reliable when more than one woman can enforce them. I took the key. We keep it on a ring by the desk now. 1 key for the tape cabinet, 1 for the side stair door, 1 for the flower shop register, 1 old brass key that opens nothing anymore but belonged to our grandmother, so we keep it because not every inheritance has to be useful. Every Tuesday afternoon, children come into the archive room for free music hour. Some are solemn, some are sticky. One little boy likes only the drum brush basket and has no interest in melody whatsoever. Mara pretends to dislike the noise and arrives every week anyway with sliced oranges in a cold metal bowl. I repair cracked ceramic mugs at the long table while the children learn rounds badly and beautifully. Lena teaches them how to bow at the end even if they forgot half the words. Sometimes I catch Mara standing in the doorway, watching them with that private, exhausted softness she thinks nobody sees. I see it now. That is the whole point of this story. If you had asked me a year earlier what my sister was to me, I would have said difficult, controlling, closed. I might even have said jealous, which would have been the laziest and cruelest answer available to a woman who had never bothered to read the records. Now I would say something cleaner. My sister was the person who agreed to be misread for as long as it took to keep me safe. That is a rare kind of love. Not pretty, not grateful, not often rewarded on time, but real. And the last image I want to leave you with is not my father leaving the theater, though he did. Not the audience applauding, though they did. Not even my mother's voice on the tape, though I still hear it when the room goes very quiet. It is this: late light in the upstairs music room, dust moving gold through it. A child at the piano stumbling through the left hand of a song my mother wrote before I was born. Mara at the doorway with a bowl of orange slices. Me at the table with the archive ledger open, writing down what is taken out, what is returned, what must stay protected, and what can finally be touched. That is the new life. Not the absence of pain, the presence of care, correctly named. And if you ever find yourself standing in front of someone who looks too cold to be kind, do not hand them innocence and call that wisdom. Ask what they have been holding shut and why. Sometimes the locked door is not cruelty. Sometimes it is the last honest thing between you and a smiling man with paperwork. Sometimes the person who kept saying no was the only reason your yes still belonged to you.
Thank you for watching. If you'd like to hear more, you can follow this channel. Don't forget to hit that little bell icon to be notified when a new video is uploaded.